Angelo, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ashley. This is one I'm more excited about, I think, because
Oh,
I'm intrigued by your questions
okay.
and the
Well,
dialogue we'll have. I feel like you take this stuff really seriously, which I love.
I think one thing, and we probably have a lot of things in common, but one thing that you and I definitely have in common is a passion for the importance of protein, of building muscle, having healthy muscle, longevity, optimizing our health. All of those things are things that I talk about constantly, forever ad nauseum on the podcast and anywhere else. And I know that you feel strongly about this stuff too. But before we even, like, I have so many directions I want to go, but when I was reading your bio, because unfortunately we have not met in person, we don't know each other. You have a very colorful life history already, and you're not an old person, so you've lived a lot of life. And I was thinking as I was reading it, I'm like, I could ask you one question and it would take the entire podcast probably to get through it. Do you Have you done this before? Have you already been on a podcast to talk about your life? Like, not even your business or your company or your health passions, but just your life up to this point?
First of all, I love the adjective colorful because it makes
Well,
me sound like I was like I was a bad kid. But honestly, I think that is, I mean, the context is like, wow, I went through a lot as like an
yes.
adolescent. But yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of, I don't know how many podcasts I've done, 50, 100 or
Yeah.
something, but some that are more lifestyle oriented, they really like that content, right? They like
Yeah.
more the journey of the person and
Hmm.
what they went through and how they built resiliency and, how to grow as a human. And so I've
Yeah.
done a lot of that. Yeah.
I mean, there is something to be said for generally, and I've done a lot of interviewing myself, and people who have had to really overcome some intense things tend to have kind of some stronger convictions in terms of health and taking what they've learned and really using it to, again, I use this word too much probably, but optimize themselves moving forward. Like when you have had the ups and downs that you've had, I think that can really inform how you want to live moving forward. Also, and we don't even have to get into it because, again, that could probably be 2 or 3 podcasts, but how many languages do you speak and what languages do you speak?
I mean, I really speak like English, Spanish, and French, and I
Okay.
speak, and probably in the order it's English, French, Spanish, but I've
Okay.
studied Arabic, classical Greek, Hindi, Kannada, which is a language in India. I lived in India for a while.
Hmm.
Um, but I lived and worked in French in France for many years, and I
Okay.
speak Spanish well enough to work in
Okay.
Spanish. So
And the romance languages are kind of similar and stuff too. Have you ever been to Canada and tried to speak French to the Canadians?
I have not, and
Okay.
it's funny. That's actually a really interesting example of where I'm like, whoa, like I thought my French was so good. And I watched like a movie where they're speaking Quebecois and it's like the accent is so different. But then I think about when I lived in France for a few years and I went on trainings in England and I thought there was someone like a Welsh person in my
Mm,
training program. I could not understand what that dude was saying. So it makes me
yeah.
feel better that it's like accent is pretty distinct. So I mean, it's not like I can't understand, but it's pretty different accent.
Well, again, as a Canadian growing up and being around French speaking Canadians and learning, where I think a lot of Americans learn Spanish in school, we learn French. And yeah, the accent's wild. And I remember one time I've been to France and I remember like hearing, I was like at a cafe or something and I heard people speaking and I'm like, it sounds like they're speaking in such a way to help me understand what they're saying. They're speaking so clearly and
Mm.
so beautifully that like I can understand more than I normally would. And I'm like, oh, because that's France French, not no offense to any French Canadians listening. You are beautiful. I love you. I love Canada. I love you. But yes, the accent is very very different. Anyway, we're going off on tangents. We can get back to some personal stuff maybe if we come back around to it. But the main reason that we're here to talk is you are the founder of Kion, which is a company that I use a lot of your products that makes really, I think, health and fitness. Going to use the word again, optimizing products and real food products. But you've got things like creatine, you've got an immune product that I use a lot, especially when I'm traveling, that I'm a really big fan of. And one of your sort of, I think, big areas of focus are amino acids, essential amino acids. And when I had started talking with some folks from Kion, because like I said, I've been using your products on and off for a really long time. I wasn't super keen on the aminos. I was like, I like a lot of your products. I don't feel like I really need them. I just, I eat a lot of meat. I have a pretty healthy diet. I don't know, like, do I really need those? And, I have kind of heard the reverberations in the fitness world of like BCAAs being basically just expensive kind of Kool-Aid. People are buying them from GNCs and putting it in their, you know, pre-workout, and it's not really doing anything. And I'm like, I know essential amino acids are different, but I don't know. Do I really? And the folks at Kion were like, just try and, give it a shot. And I remember reaching back out. I had done this like 10K trail run with my husband, and I was training for a 10K at the time. And I'm not like a big outdoor trail runner. That's not really my sport. I'm not very good at it. I had a great run, but I remember thinking like, I'm going to be messed up from this. So I'm just going to have some amino acids right after. I'm going to drink them right away. I'm going to take care of myself, have a warm bath, whatever. And the next day I remember feeling like markedly better than I expected to. This is an N=1 kind of experiment here. I can't say like this was a magic thing that fixed me, but it definitely piqued my interest, where I'm like, maybe there is something going on here that could be helping me. And I was just too quick to kind of turn away at the idea. And normally I like to think of myself as a more open-minded person. So anyway, so here we are, because I want you to tell me everything about amino acids, essential amino acids, the product specifically, why we should maybe be considering supplementing with these things, even those of us who, a large, I think, amount of my audience are meat eating, and really try to go the like nutrient dense whole food route first. So anyway, that's not even really a question, but maybe if you just want to kind of start and talk about why you think this product or this concept or this idea of getting the right amount of amino acids is so important for people.
I just want to start by validating your experience, which I think is very common for people who have more of an exercise background and somewhat of a nutrition background, and they consume a lot of protein, and they've gone through basically the debunking of BCAAs as a supplement. The sense is kind of like, do I really need to, know about this? And so it's very common. Luckily, though, there's hundreds of studies over the last 25 years, specifically about protein nutrition and essential amino acid nutrition and BCAA nutrition, that I think is basically what this conversation can be about, and
Right.
really just bringing you and your whole audience up to speed about like what we've learned and what we know now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best place to start really is with protein. I'll assume your audience and you know a lot about protein, but I'll also do like a quick breakdown just to make sure we're on the same page.
Right.
So in terms of the three macronutrients, leaving out alcohol as the fourth, carbohydrates and fat, whatever you think about them, whichever one's better, their primary role outside of essential fatty acids is to be used as fuel. So we consume them and our body converts them into ATP, and that's what helps fuel our body, both for all of the regular functions that we do, like beating our heart,
Mm-hmm.
being able to breathe, making our brain work, but also through performing exercise and different types of movements. Protein can be broken down and used as a fuel source, but it's not its primary role. That's really a secondary role for it. The primary role of protein is actually to be the building blocks of our body. And the reason for that is because our body, like many people have heard, over half your body's water, and it is about that amount. But of the part that's solid mass, over half of that solid mass is made up of proteins. And those
Mm-hmm.
proteins include things like your organs, your skin, your hair, your nails, your muscle, but also things we don't oftentimes think about, like hormones, enzymes. These are actually proteins. And even the neurotransmitters in our brain through which our emotions are conducted and our psychological processes are conducted are actually the metabolites of amino acids, which are the building blocks of these proteins. So proteins play this huge role of not fueling our body, but actually being our body, like
Mm-hmm.
the actual material substance that makes up who we are. But the way that proteins function in nature and in our body is that they have a certain lifespan. And that protein, after a certain amount of time, I mean, there's tons of these, right? These little proteins, they're no longer as functional as they could be. They get old. And so what happens is the protein breaks down. So you'll hear of protein breakdown, protein turnover, protein synthesis. Well,
Mhm.
protein breakdown is where the protein literally breaks apart. And when it breaks apart into these little individual amino acids that make it up, the 20 dietary amino acids. Some of them can be reused to help build a new protein, and some are old, and you just pee them out. They become urea.
Right.
So the primary reason why we eat protein is because we actually eat the protein, we digest it, we break it down into the 20 amino acids, they go into our blood, and then they literally help rebuild all the proteins throughout our entire body. Now, there's a very distinct role of muscle that is different from all of our other organs and our skin and all the other proteins in our body. Muscle is not only the thing that helps us to move, but it's also the reservoir of amino acids for the rest of our body. So literally, if you do not eat protein for a few hours, you go through enough period of time to where you have not consumed any protein and thus broken down the amino acids and supplied it to your blood, what will happen is you don't have enough amino acids in your blood to help rebuild basic tissues, to help rebuild proteins in your heart and your liver and your kidneys, your skin, etc. So what happens is you actually start breaking down muscle tissue, and you break down that muscle into the individual amino acids, the proteins of the muscle into the individual amino acids, and it supplies the rest of the body with amino acids to help support all the other organs and tissues, enzymes, and the metabolites of it.
Mhm.
So that's like the core, just making sure we're all on the same page. Like this is the core reason why you consume protein and what's inside of it and how it works.
Mhm.
Um,
Beautifully put. That was an excellent masterclass. That was really good. Yeah.
awesome. Good. Thank you. Um, so then the question becomes, okay, well, like how much protein do I need to eat? On what kind of basis in order to support these processes in my body? And are there different qualities of protein that I might want to consume? And how do different types of dietary protein, how do I actually use them? And all of this depends a lot on your age, your daily activity levels, if you have any unique circumstances, like you're trying to lose weight, or you're in caloric restriction, or you are aging. And I'll just say aging, the processes of aging and the impacts of aging on protein synthesis started about 30, but are really like markedly noticeable at age 40. And then every decade after that, it gets more and more significant.
This is the kind of information I don't like to hear. I know I need to hear it, but I
Mhm.
don't like to hear it. As someone who is currently aging,
Yeah.
I hate it. I hate to hear it, but it makes me feel better that I'm like, the best way to I guess slow this stuff down is to be doing the right things all the time and since you were young, right? So hopefully that's on my side, but I hate to hear it. I hate to hear about the aging thing.
Luckily, like, or I don't know if luckily, but everyone else is going through it too. So
I
you're not alone
guess.
in it, right?
Yeah,
We're
you're
all
right.
we're all part of the aging process.
You're right.
So, um, in the context of all that, I'm curious, what do you typically advise your audience around how much dietary protein to consume daily?
Yeah. So the very kind of general rule that we'll tell listeners, and again, this is, as I'm sure you'd say too, it's pretty highly individual considering your goals and who you are as a human being. But generally, we're saying about a gram per pound of body weight or ideal body weight. So if you're someone looking to lose a lot of weight, maybe the weight you'd like to be, and if you're actively trying to build muscle, maybe a little bit more. And then maybe a little bit more also if you are, here we go again, in the quote unquote aging category. So if you're in
Mhm.
your 40s, 50s, 60s, if you're in perimenopause or menopause and you're having some of these hormonal shifts and things just aren't kind of doing what they used to do as easily. And we know that we kind of make use of those amino acids, I think, less efficiently as we get older. You can probably speak to that more. So older aging individuals actually probably require a little bit more protein than maybe their 20, 30-year-old counterparts. So that's sort of the general outline.
I think that's a great general outline. I mean, I think the
Mhm.
science is somewhere kind of around like zero point 0.7 grams per pound of body weight up to like 1.5. And I always just find that like this, the simplest guidance for
Yes.
most people listening to a podcast about health is a gram per pound of body weight,
Hmm.
or ideal, but I would really say per pound of body weight. And we can get into why that is, because actually
Sure.
your need for protein, the essential amino acids in protein greatly increases during caloric restriction in order to maintain muscle mass.
Right.
But
I
you're going to be
think
consuming a lot more calories if you're eating, if you're trying to lose 50 pounds, you're consuming 50 more grams of protein. But actually, if you could squeeze that in and reduce the other amount of carbs and fat,
yes.
it's more aligned with the goal of maintaining the muscle and only losing fat.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I mean, I think the biggest challenge that we find with my audience and like the clients that I maybe work with in a coaching capacity, who again tend to be women, and in many cases come from a place of restricting, under eating, and the idea of telling. We're in a bubble, so I sometimes feel like this isn't as crazy as I think it is. But I have clients who have been eating, when they actually start tracking, they're maybe eating 40, 60 grams of protein a day. So to tell them, if they are 160, 175 pounds, or trying to lose a little bit of weight, to tell them to eat that much protein is like a mountain too high to climb, right? But if we could say, like, let's get to 100, let's get to 125 if we really can, like that's like a starting point. But I
Hmm.
also tell people, depending on, again, your strength goals or how ready and willing you already are, I'm like, it's pretty hard to overeat protein to the point of it being detrimental. It's sort of just the one, if you want to go a little crazy on, maybe you can. And also it just doesn't tend to be as hyper palatable, right? Like, we all know we can overeat the hell out of some fat and carbs, but if you're eating steak and fish and seafood and stuff, like, you're just not going to eat it to the point where it's going to do something damaging to you, generally speaking. So anyway, yeah.
So with all that in mind, I think the contextualization I want to offer is that for the protein that you're trying to consume, what you're really trying to consume is the essential amino acids inside of the protein.
Right.
And the reason for that is because the essential amino acids, which make up part of the protein, there's also non-essential amino acids, conditionally essential amino acids, but really the essential amino acids are the ones that your body can't synthesize, meaning you have to consume them. And secondarily, I just said it, the active component, they're the part of that actually stimulates new protein synthesis.
Mm.
The other ones can be used to help build the proteins, but they're not the ones that stimulate the protein synthesis, and you have a much lesser need for them. So when you're evaluating protein sources, and let's just say you're trying to get 100 grams of protein in per day, it's not really just like 100 grams of protein. You're really trying to get, if you're eating the highest quality protein, and I'm just going to say a beef or a whey protein or something like that, it's almost half essential amino acids and it's highly digestible. So when you're looking for a protein source, first thing you want to see is, how does my body actually digest this protein source, break it apart, and are the amino acids in it available? And it tends to be that animal sources of protein are more available, like the actual amino acids inside of them. Then the next question you ask is, well, what's the percentage of the essential amino acids in them? And it is the case that, again, with animal proteins, they tend to be much higher in essential amino acids. But even, something that's very high in essential amino acids, like a whey protein, it's not even quite half.
Mm.
So less than half of it is actually essential amino acids. And then the last question you want to ask is, what is the composition of those essential amino acids? You could actually have more or less leucine, more or less isoleucine, valine, et cetera. And there's certain combinations that are, when we say ideal, it just means that your body will use them more and
Mm.
you'll stimulate more protein synthesis than another protein source.
Hmm.
And so out of like what we'll call whole food proteins, a whey protein basically has like that most ideal composition when we've studied it side by side with other things.
Hmm.
So the other thing to bring up here is that also there's something that goes on when you eat a whole food protein in a mixed meal versus you eat the protein alone versus you eat an isolated form of it. So in normal situations, I think people think, if I eat a protein, like if I eat meat, it's going to stimulate protein synthesis. Like, is that the way it works? I thought I had to like do resistance training. Like I lift weights or I exercise or I do something and it stresses the muscle, and then
Right.
that kickstarts this whole process of building new proteins. So resistance training and even endurance training does do that, but actually protein sources themselves can stimulate protein synthesis. And the difference between even 70 grams of beef as part of a mixed meal versus 30 grams of beef eaten in isolation, the 30 grams of beef stimulates more protein synthesis than the 70 eaten in a whole mixed meal.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
And this is a great question. It's because the amino acids and the protein, their ability to stimulate protein synthesis is basically the peak concentrations that can be reached in the blood and thus hit the muscle at once. So meaning like when I'm eating like a whole mixed meal, there's a lot more digestion going on and the proteins, the amino acids are getting mixed with other things. Whereas if I'm only eating the beef in isolation, it gives an actual like it's that's all that I have in my system and it enters the blood and it stimulates literally half the amount of beef stimulates as more protein synthesis than double. But it gets even maybe more clear as I give the examples of other food products or supplements. A whey protein is many more times, or whey protein isolate is many, many, many more times the muscle protein synthesis of even the isolated beef protein. And that's because the whey protein isolate as a supplement is even more isolated. Like a whey protein isolate, not only are you stripping out the fats, you've stripped out even the sugars. And all you're left with is just the most potent source of the protein itself. So people oftentimes think, oh, I'm, adding whey protein isolate to my shake. It's kind of the same thing as the meat. Like actually, the whey protein isolate has a much bigger impact on muscle protein synthesis than the exact same amount of meat.
Okay, I gotta take this in for a second because
Uh-huh.
first of all, this is making me feel a little bit better about my no pun intended meathead tendencies of loving protein shakes and eating just meat on its own all the time. This makes me feel a little bit better about
Yeah.
my tendency to do that. And it does make sense. What you're saying makes sense. So there's two thoughts that are coming up immediately to my mind, and I don't want to jump around too much, but one, how does this information gel with what I still believe to be conventional wisdom of we should be eating whole foods? We should be eating whole foods and we should be eating nice, well-rounded meals that have the fats and the carbs that we need for our energy and our life enjoyment and all of these things. How do we sort of balance that with knowing that in some cases supplementation is actually a more effective route to maybe what our goals might be?
I think it's a great question. What I would say is my perspective from living a good, wholesome, healthy life is that the foundation of your diet is whole foods in meals that you like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if fundamentally you are someone that really just likes to eat steak on its own, I would say, great, eat steak on its own. I would tell you, there's a lot of micronutrients that come from vegetables and come from fruits.
Sure.
And, even like whole grains could give you healthy carbs and like other things to help fuel yourself. But if you really like eating that meat, then like do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think the foundation of one's diet being built from whole, complete meals that you really like and that are made from whole foods is the ideal situation. Then the question is, well, are there ways to supplement that? And I think when you look at like, well, how do you supplement that? I don't think it's replacing your dinner or
Sure.
replacing your lunch or something like that. But oftentimes people are looking for snacks in between the day, right? Or they're looking for ways to support their exercise, either before, during, or after their exercise. Or some people really like this experience of intermittent fasting,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really just an optional thing if someone likes it. I think when you look at it compared to overall caloric restriction and other diets, like there's no real like major advantages from it. But if
Yeah.
you like it and it helps you with your focus in the morning or for whatever reasons, um, the idea of actually supplementing with some other type of protein or essential amino acid supplement during that period does make sense
Yeah.
because basically you can stimulate protein synthesis, which is very positive for your body in all these different ways, in a way that is much more efficient or effective. But it's not like to replace your other meals, it's really more to supplement. And I
Mm-hmm.
think when you think about supplementation, it is the case that you need either the older you get and the more unique circumstances you have, the more sense it makes to supplement. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think an example we'll give is, and we're kind of jumping around, but hopefully this is all kind of coming together for your audience,
Mm-hmm.
the weight loss goal.
Mm-hmm.
So what's really interesting is, and I'm confirm we're on the same page here, like are we generally aligned that weight loss will occur ultimately through caloric restriction?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Now, ideally, you want to build muscle and you want to build like overall like a healthy frame, et
Sure.
cetera. But fundamentally, you need to be, restricting calories to a degree which you're consuming less calories and you're burning on a daily basis.
It is interesting though, and again, I don't want to be like completely hippity hopping all over the
Mhm.
place, but it is funny that you even, and you're being diplomatic. You're like, just checking to make sure you're not one of these weirdos who doesn't believe that calories matter, because that's a thing right now, right? Like there are people who argue that like that's not as that
Yeah, it's not
important
even
or
a
something.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right?
it's pretty wild. I mean,
Weird.
I understand that there are real elements of some people can have very specific hormonal situations that
Absolutely.
impact the calories differently. And there's ways in which blood sugar spikes can provoke, cortisol. Like there are other things that are also true at the same time, but I would say
Yes.
fundamentally it comes down to like how many calories you burn on a daily
100%
basis.
agree.
Okay.
Yes.
So what's really interesting though, and this is more recent studies just from the last few years, but it's from the leaders in protein and amino acid research, is that a 30% reduction in calories over 5 days, which is somewhat aggressive, but I would say like for someone my size, that would be to like lose like a pound and a half to like 2 pounds a week, that's aggressive. It's more than like a pound
Hmm.
a week, but it's not like I don't think it's
It's
ill
not like
advised.
Biggest
Yeah,
Loser style
yeah, it's like trying to
ridiculous.
lose five
Yeah.
pounds a week. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in that case, there's a 300% increase for daily essential amino acid intake in order to maintain a net protein balance.
Mm.
So I'll break that down. The reason for that is that when you restrict the calories, as I said earlier, the primary role of protein is not to be used as a fuel source. But when you restrict your calories by 30%, your body starts looking at protein differently. Your body's not saying like, oh, let's use this surplus of the essential amino acids and the protein to help build new muscle for later on. No, it's like maybe we should burn more of these and use more of
Mm.
these. And it's not prioritizing building and maintaining muscle. So you literally have a 300% increase. But if you do increase your essential amino acid, whatever, and this is kind of the tricky thing about like, well, how many grams of protein, how much amino acids did you really need to begin with in order to
Hmm.
maintain your muscle mass?
Hmm.
If you thought it was about 100 grams of protein, quality protein, 50 grams of which are essential amino acids, you're going to need 300 grams of protein or 150 grams of essential amino acids daily in order to maintain the same amount of muscle that you have and to only be burning and losing fat during that period. So that's
Mm.
an example of, whoa, that is a lot more protein. Like I don't can't it's hard for me to imagine eating that much more protein. Well, when you look at something like free-form essential amino acids, something like Kion aminos, it is so much more efficient
Mm.
than not only the protein, even the whey. So essential amino acids in a population of women, slightly older women, 60-year-old women, is 6 times the amount of muscle protein synthesis gram for gram as whey. So 3 grams of amino acids was equal to 20 grams of whey protein. So when you
In
start
terms of
thinking about
what they were absorbing and using and
in
taking
terms
in.
of what you're absorbing, using, and actually
Yeah.
stimulating in protein synthesis.
Yes. Okay.
So instead of having to consume like 150 grams of this additional protein, instead you'd be consuming like 30 grams of essential amino acids during a period of weight cutting. Like when you're trying to lose fat but you're trying to maintain muscle, it's a very sensible, reasonable way to maintain your daily essential amino acid intake, maintain your muscle while you're trying to lose that weight and not have to eat so much protein. Because even like you were saying, yeah, someone who's at 40, 60 grams of protein and you're telling them they need 160, that's pretty hard. But if you could even just get them to, 100 grams of protein and then maybe like
Supplementing.
20 grams of essential amino acids, you've gotten them over the equivalent probably of that 160 grams of protein. So there's ways in which you can use essential amino acids in very targeted ways. And one specific example like that is caloric restriction.
Hmm. Okay. I got to give listeners a peek behind the curtain. I have to go turn my light on because it's getting dark in here. I'm three
Okay.
hours. I'm 3 hours later than you. We can edit this out, but it's getting dark over here. I don't want it to seem
Okay.
like I'm speaking around a campfire or something. Hold on. Okay. That's better. There we go. All right. Yeah, this is so fascinating. And I mean, I love that you just referenced a study, first of all, that was older women, because this is another issue that we're constantly coming up against where research is not being done in these areas on women, for women, with women in mind. And we tend to be an audience, a group that does not eat enough protein, certainly does not eat enough animal protein. So I think that this conversation is so important. What's also coming up for me selfishly, now that I have been using Kion aminos pretty regularly since I've gotten them, it makes me feel better. Like, because now I'm thinking, I'm like, I eat so much protein, but this concept of generally only maybe half of the animal protein I'm taking in is actually essential amino acids. I'm like, maybe I'm not getting as much protein as I thought. And it also makes me feel better because I was kind of feeling a little guilty for a while that I would be taking it like on days that I wasn't working out. And I'm like, am I like wasting it, or is this not really like doing much? And I think based on what you've been explaining, it's absolutely still useful and good. And it doesn't have to necessarily be something you're only taking around working out, right? Or even for that purpose. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's very accurate. What I would say is like if you're, you know, younger than 30 years old and you're hitting daily higher protein intake, like you're way over, you're definitely hitting a gram of protein per pound of body weight every single day. I think that something like Kion aminos makes sense primarily or before exercise,
Okay.
before, during, or after exercise. It's going to literally make the exercise more efficient. You're going to get more muscle gain from it. Not necessarily more hypertrophy, but actually more. You could get more hypertrophy depending on what the type of training is, but you'll literally replace more of the muscle fibers, have healthier muscle, you'll reduce fatigue, and you'll improve recovery, taking it in and around that time. But taking it outside of that period, if you're eating a lot of protein, then I mean, it's not as beneficial. If you're trying to cut weight though, or
Mm-hmm.
you have an injury or surgery or something like that, then it's extremely important to be taking some type of supplement like this. If you're over 30 years old, it makes sense to just take every day. And the reason for that, and I would say every single decade, the older that you get, you have a reduced ability both to digest the protein, that meaning like actually when you eat the protein, the bioavailability of the amino acids for you to be able to use them becomes reduced, but also your sensitivity and your body's inclination to stimulate new protein synthesis and to use those amino acids to build and maintain muscle becomes reduced.
Mm-hmm.
And so literally every single decade, like if you think basically in your 20s, essential, like a scoop of essential amino acids is basically 3 times the impact of a whey protein. Every decade after that, it becomes 4, 5, 6, 7, many more times the impact of a whey protein. And then you compare that to a whole food protein, it's even more times than that. But if you're eating a lot of protein and you're generally active, it's like I think you're going to get the most amount of benefit from it or in and around exercise. But basically, anyone who's over 30, that's when you really start to experience the benefits of it
Yeah.
because you're simply not getting from the protein what you got before. And you brought up another unique situation like perimenopause.
Mm-hmm.
So for people in their 40s and 50s, regardless of gender, you have a significant reduction in your ability to break down the proteins and a reduction in your sensitivity to stimulate mTOR and to stimulate new muscle. And it makes sense, right? Like you think back, many, many hundreds, thousands of years, like we weren't like trying to get strong and
Beach
stay super,
bods.
yeah,
No.
stay super active when we're like 55. It
Sure.
was like we had grandkids when we were 55, and like
Mm-hmm.
we were lucky if we were alive, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not, we're much, we're not out like hunting or doing other really types of aggressive, active type things. Um, so yeah, it's simply not prioritized as much. But with women in particular, because of the hormonal shifts during perimenopause, we don't totally understand exactly why it happens, but there's an even greater diminishment of sensitivity to amino acids to stimulate new protein synthesis. So you could have
Mm-hmm.
someone who, for the last 20 years, has eaten a gram of protein per pound of body weight, done resistance training a few times per week, eats really clean, goes through menopause, and suddenly the benefits of the resistance training are diminished compared to what they used to be. And the benefits of the protein intake are simply not what they used to be. And again,
Yeah.
that's another situation in which you kind of start to see like how supplements can fit in. Going back to your question, like, you don't replace your meals. It's not like you
Sure.
stop eating good, wholesome meals,
Sure.
but you can see that it's really, aging, fat loss goals where you're trying to lose fat and maintain muscle. And the other main case I would say is like situations of injury and recovery
Okay.
where supplementing with amino acids makes a lot of sense.
Is there any research? This is like a complete aside, but any research around women supplementing with amino acids during like pregnancy or postpartum? I mean, those are obviously times of massive change, growth, recovery, all of those things. I mean, it would kind of make sense that that would be maybe a good thing to be implementing, but do you know of any sort of research around that specifically?
Yes, I don't believe that there's really targeted research specifically around free form essential amino acids, so taking only of the essential amino
Right.
acids outside the context in the context of pregnancy. There definitely has been around protein intake and the need
Yeah.
for increased protein intake and
Yeah.
thus the inherent essential amino acids in the protein.
Yeah.
I can speak from experience of having many customers from Kion and partners who are, in the wellness space and have been pregnant and gone through postpartum that they have specifically used Kion aminos in those contexts and seen
Hmm.
great benefit. But I think it's definitely also one of those situations where it's a unique um, health situation in which I would consult one's doctor
Absolutely.
to look into like what is your daily protein intake, what are your activity levels, does this make sense? I think it's typically been with pretty active women, who
Hmm.
are trying to maintain their activity levels, trying to maintain their energy levels, trying to maintain muscle that want to get back in shape,
Hmm.
quickly after they've
Hmm.
given birth.
Hmm.
And they've found great benefit from it in that context.
Yeah, it is kind of a frustration. You know, I have one child, I have a 2.5-year-old. And when I was doing a ton of research around nutrition and things like that, I mean, I understand why there isn't a lot of targeted research on a lot of things with pregnant women because there's just the inherent risks and the fear of like, we don't want to use pregnant women as guinea pigs. Like, I 100% understand that. But as I'm sure you're aware, being in this world too, things can swing so far to the other side where we just have bizarre fear-based reactions to what we should or shouldn't be doing around pregnancy. For example, like I'm a huge advocate of high protein diets and animal protein diets and nose to tail organ meat specifically. And I would get so many questions of people who were like terrified of the idea that I would eat liver during pregnancy or that I would eat, I don't know, sushi or deli meats or things like
And
that,
what,
or
what was the what
runny
was the what was the fear of the liver? I
too
don't.
much vitamin A
Hmm.
toxicity, which
Hmm.
is incredibly difficult to get through food. It's usually, if you're having vitamin A toxicity, it's usually a supplementation thing, but also even more difficult to get through liver because nobody's eating that much liver. Nobody wants to eat that much liver. Let's be
Yeah.
real. I'm an advocate of eating organ meats, but it's not a hyper palatable food. You're not going to eat 12 ounces of that 3 times a day for a year to get vitamin A toxicity, right? But and I ate sushi when I wanted to. And this is all to your point earlier. You need to do what feels right and safe for you, and you need to consult with your medical professional and all of these things. But it's like this wisdom that gets lost because we're so afraid. And because pregnancy and birth has become so medicalized that people are like, well, would you risk eating a fish that could make you sick? And it's like, do you think that the women in Japan don't eat sushi because they're pregnant? I mean, it's their food and it's delicious and it's healthy and you eat high quality foods all the time and it's good for you. And if you're craving it, I mean, that's something that you might want to consider. And I ate organ meats all through my pregnancy and I felt really good about that because I was doing a ton of work and I needed to be nourished. I kind of now looking back wish I had some amino acids in my beverage, but we could talk about that another time. I'd love to talk a little bit about you mentioned sort of the breakdown or the optimal kind of combination of amino acids, and this is where I think it can get a little bit potentially overwhelming or perhaps interesting for people who like to nerd out on stuff like this. But the general kind of, I think, education level around this stuff is like knowing when things are complete or not complete proteins, and knowing, collagen is a big thing in the
Hmm.
wellness supplementation world right now. And I use collagen. I like collagen. And knowing that's an incomplete protein, but it has amino acids that work specifically to improve things like your gut lining and your hair, skin, and nails and things like that. And it goes to the areas where you need it and all that stuff. But you wouldn't use it in place of your whey protein or in place of your animal foods because it's not a complete protein. You're only getting some amino acids. So with your product, but just supplementing in general, how do we know which of these amino acids we need and in what combination and in what amounts? How do we parse that out?
It's a great question, and I'll try to be nuanced, but also not overcomplicate it.
Okay, great.
Because, I think it really is a situation in which uh, each of these products and has unique benefits, but they're different benefits, and like why and how do they make sense? One thing I want to say is kind of a bridge from your comments about pregnancy and studying, supplementation in that context, is that luckily we do actually though have a lot of research. I quoted that one about women, older women, and EAA supplementation, but actually a lot, tens, if not hundreds of studies specific to women around protein nutrition and essential amino acid nutrition. So it's one of those spaces actually where it's been studied in young athletic women, middle-aged women, older senior citizen women. So there's really been a lot of studies, and it's not the kind of thing where you just have to interpret data from men,
Right. Great.
which is great. Also, in general, though, it's actually pretty similar. So the outcomes are pretty similar to studies around men.
Great.
So kind of breaking down, I'll address a few. I'll just maybe I can address collagen. I may even go back and address BCAAs and
That
how
would be
all
great.
these things fit together. So collagen is a cool product. Collagen is not a complete protein because it doesn't include all 9 of the essential amino acids, and that is what fundamentally makes something a complete protein. And it really goes to the heart again of understanding what we're really trying to get from our protein sources is the essential amino acids. And the reason why we're trying to get that is because that's what leads not only to muscle protein synthesis, but whole body protein synthesis. It communicates to the whole body to start rebuilding proteins, and it gives the body what it needs to do that. What collagen has a lot of, though, is 3 very distinct non-essential amino acids: proline, hydroxyproline, and glycine. You don't need to remember those, but it's got these 3 unique ones. They're not essential, but they're in really high doses. And so for someone that has trouble synthesizing those, it could make sense to take them directly. So our body can actually synthesize those and make them. You get some of them from foods that you eat, and it's typically enough for most people. But the people for whom something like a collagen makes more sense is older populations. As we get older, we have a more difficult time synthesizing collagen in our body and utilizing and being able to actually synthesize these unique non-essential amino acids. So I would say in a similar case, like someone who's 70, a 70-year-old woman is going to get a lot more benefit from a collagen supplement than a 20-year-old woman. A 20-year-old woman, I'd be like, you shouldn't waste your money on it. I really don't think it's worth your time unless, maybe you're like a really intense, endurance, like ultra endurance type runner, and basically you've taxed your body so much that proline has become conditionally essential. But if you're generally healthy and generally live a pretty healthy, in a healthy manner and eat pretty well, it's probably a waste of your money. So I mean, collagen, it's not a complete protein. I wouldn't count it towards your daily protein intake. But if you specifically want to have improvement in your hair, skin, nails, joints, and you're older, you're going to get benefit from it. I think when and why to start doing that, it's I actually turn 40 next week.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm not really a collagen user. I can imagine when I'm 50, I can imagine doing it. That said, there's also probably less social pressure and sensitivity on me about exactly what my skin looks like and what my hair looks like.
I was going to say,
yeah.
we're basically the same age. And I'm I've been caring about having good skin for a very long time. I literally mentioned offline before we started recording, I'm your skin looks great. This is something women think about. So yes, but I hear what you're saying. And I think it's again, kind of one conversation that I really like to have on this podcast and in general is about being mindful and intentional with what you do. I think there's such a lack of nuance in social media, which is the way so many people are getting their health information now. And it's either, you're shilling collagen and it's useless, you're a quack, or if you're not taking collagen, your joints are going to turn to dust tomorrow. And it's there's so much nuance. It's a legit product that can benefit certain populations. Be mindful, be thoughtful, intentional with your choices. And it seems the more I'm learning about essential amino acids, it seems like it very much to me falls into kind of the creatine camp. It's much better researched and studied than most supplements and more than I even thought. And it's not something that is it's just something that I think is useful for certain populations, certain times specifically, to reach certain goals. But with creatine, it's also kind of like most people would benefit from creatine supplementation. I guess we could talk about creatine. That's another rabbit hole. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, one reference I might make is that there's a great organization called the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and it is a group of academic researchers,
Mm-hmm.
and they're basically it's made up of people who are, you know, the head of research departments at universities all over the world that study specifically supplements that impact sports nutrition. So they
Mm-hmm.
cover things like creatine, protein, collagen, et cetera. And of the supplements that they endorse as being, you know, they actually have like real substance behind the research of them. Creatine is one of them, whey protein is one of them, and essential amino acids is.
Mm-hmm.
Collagen actually is not, I don't believe, in that
Yeah.
core category. Because for really like for sports nutrition, for like performance improvement, things like that, for overall like activity
Yeah.
type stuff, it's pretty soft. I
Yeah.
think the
Yeah.
studies are much more towards um, trying to find a nicer word than vanity, but
No, I mean,
yeah, yeah,
listen,
yeah, yeah,
vanity's a big
yeah,
thing. And
yeah.
like,
I think it's legit. I think
yeah,
we all have
we're human.
bodies and
Yeah,
eyes and want to be beautiful or handsome in some kind of way. So, um,
absolutely.
yeah, and actually, recently, the International Society of Sports Nutrition put out a position paper, which they only do on certain types of supplements on essential amino acids. It's a massive document. I think it's like 27 pages. They go through all the research. So it's like if you were trying to understand this and you didn't want to have to read hundreds of studies. It's like a 27 page
Right.
study, but that's written for like a seriously interested type person.
Mm-hmm.
And just as context, there's more studies referenced in the essential amino acid ISSN paper than there are in the creatine paper. Now, the creatine paper is older, it's like 20 years old or something, but literally there's more. I think it's like 100 in the creatine, it's like 130 in the EAA paper. In the whey protein one, which is a massive one, it's like 200 studies. So when you think about essential amino acids, it is truly it is at the level of protein and creatine in terms of legitimacy in the scientific research community and the legit sports nutrition community.
Mm-hmm.
That is not true about BCAAs.
Yeah,
So,
let's talk about this. Tell
so
us
this is
why they're
yeah,
useless.
yeah, and so this is a good introduction kind of into like the proportions and why they matter, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, um, the way research works is that it's very iterative, right? So, 40, 50 years ago, there was, no, even before that, I mean, 100 years ago, we started studying this stuff, but 40, 50 years ago, there was real insights around the branch chain amino acids. And the branch chain amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And they're three of the essential amino acids. So they're part of the 9 essential amino acids. And what was discovered was, wow, leucine plays a really big role in muscle protein synthesis. And the other two, branch is just like the actual, like the chemical structure of it.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a branch.
Mm-hmm.
Those three are really important. They clearly play this really big role in muscle protein synthesis. And so the insight was, oh, if you just isolate those and just take those, then you could get this increase in muscle protein synthesis that you typically get from, say, protein by just taking this supplement.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts getting marketed and people start taking it. And then over, several years, the scientific community realizes, oh, it actually doesn't work. And why it doesn't work is that they simply put, they discovered you must have all 9 of the essential amino acids. You can't only have those 3. And if you go for like a sports analogy, like a football team, it'd be like if you only had your 3 star players, but you didn't include like the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
team to support it, they're going to get crushed in the
Mm-hmm.
game, right? Like they can't just do it all by themselves. And
If
basically what
Taylor
happened,
Swift wasn't there, no one
yeah,
would watch and there would be no football. I'm just trying to be timely here. Anyway,
yeah,
continue.
there you go. Yeah. Um, so, um, And so basically what happens is if you just take the 3 branch chain amino acids, they do go into the blood really quickly. They create this spike in muscle protein synthesis, and then it just drops.
Mm.
And it doesn't get sustained, and there's actually no impact. And then what also happens is the body is confused by it, and it thinks it wants and needs potentially more of the other essential amino acids. So you could actually provoke muscle breakdown to supply the other essential amino acids to the blood to then help complete the muscle protein turnover, if that makes sense. It's like you're
Mhm.
giving this one ingredient, but you don't have the other ingredients, so it tells the muscle to break itself down to help rebuild it. And so in the end, it is not
It's
anabolic at
just
all,
useless.
and
Yeah.
it's even potentially catabolic. The other thing too is
Mhm.
we realize that through taking in isolation, you can provoke other types of like hormonal issues and things with blood sugar regulation, et cetera. So it's just, it doesn't work for the way that we thought it did and intended. But unfortunately, with marketing and with companies, it's like people just keep selling it. But it's interesting. Some like even like really big players market a BCAA and they even include the other essential amino acids because they know it doesn't work on its own.
That's it's so interesting. I'm like, when it seems like this is a product we can all just kind of collectively just like be like, let's get out of here. Like it's so obviously proven that this is not beneficial. But I mean, I guess there's a ton of products in the world that fall into that same category.
Yeah. So here's a little bit of nuance. And it's not to confuse the audience, but it's to offer like a little bit more information. When you take whey protein, and now we're going to get into like proportions. So whey protein really basically has been discovered to be like in a whey protein isolate, like the most ideal isolated protein source to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. It
Right.
is about 27% leucine. So if you took out all the non-essential amino acids, it's about half that. If you include all the non-essential, it's like 13%. Because I said earlier, the essential amino acids make up half. It's about
Mm-hmm.
27% of the essential amino acids, which are the things that actually do something inside of the protein.
Mm-hmm.
When you increase that 27% to 40%, like if you were to just add just leucine in to the mix,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it would increase the muscle protein synthesis by 50%. So by slightly modifying the amount of leucine, you actually get a much greater muscle protein synthesis spike. So there are studies where you combine BCAAs with whey protein and you get something better than what you get from protein alone. So that there is a potential for that. The thing is, though, we have basically uncovered that just taking the essential amino acids on them on their own are much more effective and efficient, and you don't have to mess with these different types of combining. And if you combine the essential amino acids with the whey protein, you get an even greater emphasis and spike in protein synthesis. So it's like you might as well just not waste time on the BCAAs. But
Sure.
I try to offer a little bit of nuance that it's not like there's nothing there. It's just like it doesn't make sense to take on its own, and there's other better solutions. So
Yeah.
like that's why you just shouldn't waste your time or your money with it. And the risk of taking on its own and having complications aren't good. So
Yeah.
when you get
Okay.
into like, okay, well, why is this essential amino acid supplement potentially work so well? You can formulate the essential amino acid proportions to the ideal amounts. And now what we've discovered over like 25 years of studying this, not me or Kion, but the research community, is that you basically start with the proportions of essential amino acids as they exist in human skeletal muscle. So if we were to dissect human skeletal muscle, there's a certain amount of tryptophan, histidine, threonine, like they all exist in certain proportions. If you then increase the amount of leucine to 40%, which I quoted earlier about the whey protein, and then you increase the other two BCAAs to maintain their original proportions, which
Mm-hmm.
ends up being about a 4-1-1 to the leucine, and then you increase the lysine some to be a little bit more than them actually, and that's because the lysine is slower to get into the muscle tissue we've uncovered. We actually do all this through like actual like stable isotope tracers. They like dye the amino acids and they do
Mm-hmm.
them with real humans and they have them take them in and they see how they pass through the system and how much muscle protein synthesis is stimulated. So it's very, very clear in human
Mm-hmm.
studies. It's not like animal studies or in
Mm-hmm.
vitro stuff. Like it's truly with human beings. We've discovered you need to increase the lysine, and those proportions that you end up with, which are exactly what you'll find on the back of a Kion Aminos bottle, have been shown through repeated studies with multiple different research groups, whether it's someone doing studies for NASA or for the NIH or for independent labs or sports nutrition or these older groups. It's around those proportions that maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So it really does matter what the proportions are, which, I think, if you're out there and you're intrigued by this whole subject, but you're not just like, I'm just going to go get the guy
Mm-hmm.
who's getting interviewed. I'm just going to go get his product. I'm going to look around.
Mm-hmm.
The things you want to look for are make sure there's all nine. There are some brands out there only selling 8, and they're saying, oh, the nut, histidine isn't really an essential amino acid. It is. super bunk old science from like the mid 90s. Like
Why wouldn't you just add the last one? You went all that way. Just
I
add
think
the
people just
last
get
one.
committed and like you've made your product and you're doing it and it's
Okay.
business and it's like
All
again,
right.
I know.
Okay.
Um, and also the proportions in some of those, like some of those formulas are really whack. Like
Mm,
they don't make sense and they could cause more harm than good. So the
hmm
other thing is make sure they tell you what's in it. Like in general, I'm not a big proprietary formula guy. Like if they don't tell you how much of each ingredient is in there, I'm like, it's not like it depends though. For some botanicals, and maybe it doesn't really matter if you get the general milligrams of like what the combination of the botanicals are. But for amino acids, it matters. Like
mm,
you want to know the exact amount of each amino acid that you're consuming. So they must have all nine. It needs to tell you exactly how many of each amino acid is in the product.
hmm
And then you really want these proportions, these approximate proportions that I just described to you.
Okay. This is probably going to be a dumb question, so forgive me, but I'm going to ask
There
it
are no dumb
anyway.
questions.
I wish I had one of the bottles in front of me because I have them all upstairs, but how are you creating this product? How are you sourcing these amino acids? Where's it coming from? What is it exactly?
It's a great question.
Okay.
So the science actually comes from the Japanese, and it comes from the production of things like miso and soy. So it's actually
Okay.
fermented from plants. So you can think of like miso, soy, nutritional yeast, even things like kombucha, like
Mhm.
processes of fermentation, but maybe more like soy, miso, and even like nutritional yeast, where you ferment it from sugars and then you actually like filter it out and take out just the amino acids. So it's plant-based and it's a fermentation process. Another good example would be like cheese and
Mhm.
yogurt are fermentations of the sugars that are in original milk sources.
Okay, so I mean, I'm not anti plants, all right?
Yeah.
Despite what some people may believe about me, just because I'm very pro animal protein, I'm not anti plants, but for some reason, I'm kind of surprised that this is plant derived because very few, if any, plant sources are complete proteins themselves. So you're just sort of like picking the amino acids from different
No, it's
plant
actually via the fermentation process. So via the
creates the amino
it,
acid.
yeah, actually like creates the amino acids via fermentation.
Interesting. Like so,
hmm
and you said the
And you
Japanese
can get
discovered
it.
this.
Yeah, that's basically it's when the Japanese are like really
Okay.
like the leaders in this, and it makes sense. It kind of comes from like the soy and
Right,
miso
right, right.
and like a big fermenting type culture. You
Interesting.
can derive free-form amino acid supplements from non-plant-based sources, but it's kind of gross. They use like they use away throwaway sources like duck feathers and even in some places like human hair. So it's a pretty gross where they're breaking it apart. But what's weird about it is like yeah, it's a very cheap way to get it, but they're not as high quality. It's just gross. It's gross.
I mean, human
Yeah.
hair. That sounds like
hmm
a Black Mirror episode or something. That is really, really interesting. I don't know why I'm surprised by that, but it makes sense as you're explaining it. But that's really interesting. Is
It was
there
surprising. I mean, it was surprising to me. I mean, we didn't go too much in my history, but I actually was raised in a family that was vegetarian slash pescatarian. So
okay?
we got a lot of our protein from, as a small child, I got a lot of my protein from fish and
hmm
from soy products and things like that. But my parents were very serious about protein nutrition. So we talked about protein combining and like needing to
Cool.
combine certain types of beans and rice, et cetera, and things like that. But my
hmm
parents also exposed me to amino acids at a very young age. And I just like kind of did it as a kid. I didn't totally
Sure.
understand. But as I got older and really started thinking about it, I was like, how does that work? And then it's like, as you learn more about the fermentation process, even with things again like cheese and
Yeah.
yogurt, it starts to make more sense.
Your parents were more sorted out than most for sure in that department.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Um,
I
is
am a
there
big
any,
meat eater now, I have to admit. Like I basically,
we all
around
come
middle,
around. We all come
we
around.
all
Yeah.
come around. Yeah.
Is there
Big
in your
sushi. Sushi's
yeah,
my jam.
see,
I love sushi.
it's the best.
Yeah,
Sushi
and my
all the
son,
time.
like we could eat sushi every day.
How old? You have
I
two
have two. I have
kids?
a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. 10-year-old boy and
Okay.
an 8-year-old girl. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Um, is there in your experience, is there anybody for whom this supplement of amino acids isn't a good idea or they don't tolerate it well. And I ask because I mean, I think the whole thing is that amino acids are very, very bioavailable and really easily absorbed. But I know that there is sort of a small subsection of folks who, for example, have a really hard time with collagen. Like they take collagen supplements and it like messes with their gut. It doesn't, they feel nauseous. It's like an odd reaction. Is that a thing with amino acids or no?
There's a very unique group of people that actually have a hard time just consuming protein and amino
Right.
acids in general, but
Right.
you would have been made aware of that like as a child, likely, and diagnosed with that. So
Right.
if
Right.
you're someone who eats protein fine, then it's very unlikely you'd have any types of issues with
Okay.
essential amino acids, particularly if you're having an ultra clean, high quality version of it. I mean, I think that's another thing that comes up too. Is some people think like, oh, I've tried. By the way, I'm a fan of whey protein. Kion, we make a whey protein isolate. I think of them as two different tools. Like
Mhm.
I take my whey protein isolate and I put it with blueberries
Mm.
and water and like have this awesome like milkshakey type thing.
Yes. Make
And I
ice
take
cream,
yeah, I
like,
make ice cream, thing like that. And I
yeah.
take my aminos when I want something lighter and it's like right before training, or it's where I want to be like more in a fasted type stage when I have coffee. I don't want to like feel weighed down. And it's much more efficient and effective, but it's not like, it's not like getting to have like a protein shake. So,
Right.
um, why did I go into that?
I have another question before,
Okay.
if this can come back to you. Can
Yeah.
you overdo it? Now, I know, again, this is a supplement. It's not going to be like necessarily the most inexpensive. Like, this is an investment in your health, you know? So,
Yeah.
most people aren't going to probably be using this recklessly and drinking it like it's Kool-Aid or whatever. But, you know, it tastes good. Your products taste good. It's a nice, like, nice, flavorful drink, whatever. Could you, if I'm like drinking this all day long, is the worst that could happen is I'm just kind of maybe peeing out some extra amino acids and I'm just sort of not making use of it? Or can you overdo it to a point that it's bad?
So overall, daily safe intake has been established at about 20 servings. So that would be
Okay.
100 grams. So I doubt there's anyone who's going to be taking that unless you're in like a very acute short stage situation. And like the one example of that, which I think makes a lot of sense, is actually like bed rest. And this
Mm,
came about through like a NASA study where they were trying to figure out how to help NASA astronauts maintain muscle mass without any type of resistance, right? Because they're in gravity. So they did
hmm.
a study, and this is almost 20 years ago now. They had a few actually, but the follow-up studies. But they had people at bed rest for 28 days on a normal diet, but they couldn't move, they couldn't do anything. And anyone who's been at bed rest just knows like you just waste away. Well, they gave them the equivalent of 3 servings of Kion aminos 6 times a day. So it'd be like 18 servings a day. And after
Hmm.
28 days, there was no net muscle loss.
Wow.
So that just shows you the actual impact of consuming essential amino acids, even in times when you're not exercising, not using
Yeah.
it as the building blocks to be used by the stimulus of the resistance exercise. Literally on days off when you're not training, or outside of exercise periods, how much benefit it can create for building and maintaining lean muscle.
Hmm.
But it also gives you an example of like that might be a time when I might take that many servings. Like if
Yeah.
I got injured or I had to have some kind of surgery and I was laid up, like I would be upping my intake for that
Yes.
period just to maintain my muscle mass during that period because I can't one, I literally can't consume that much protein, even
Hmm.
animal protein, which is more efficient, or whey protein, without probably gaining weight, et cetera.
Hmm.
And the amino acids will literally just be targeted specifically on the muscle and the protein synthesis. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that's kind of like an upper daily limit. But what I would
Hmm.
say is, um, if you're using it as a daily nutritional supplement specifically to support your needs for essential amino acids, like you're having a hard time hitting these higher daily protein requirements. You're already eating protein, 2 to 3 times a day, but it's like I don't want to eat more chicken breast, or I don't want to do
Hmm.
like one more whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and you're adding it in. I mean, you can easily add it in like first thing in the morning, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, before after exercise, and it's very sustainable and healthy over a long
Hmm.
term in that kind
Hmm.
of context. Um, so I think that's typically how you see. Oh, so I was going to say, so in a nutritional context, that's kind of what would make sense. And then naturally, before, during, and after exercise, it makes a lot of sense. Lots of people take it before bed because
Hmm.
basically before bed, it not only does it satiate you, but it really does support your body and maintaining muscle over that more extended period of having no amino acid intake over the night.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, maximum intake in one setting, what has been shown, and a lot of the stuff I'm quoting, especially like these kinds of very condensed information, is all available in that ISSN study. So
Is
um,
that linked on your website anywhere, or is that like,
I
do you?
don't think it's linked on
Okay.
the website, but if you search
Yeah.
ISSN essential amino acid position paper, you're gonna
Okay.
find it immediately.
Okay.
And I can send it to you. You could include it in the show notes of
Cool.
here. Yeah.
Great.
So basically the upper limit of one set, like one intake, one dose would be 15 to 18 grams. So that'd be like 3 servings at once. If you take more than that, we really don't see an increase in muscle protein synthesis or whole body protein synthesis, but it's actually linear up until that amount. So
Mm-hmm.
10 grams is twice as much as 5 grams, and 15 grams is 3 times as much as 5 grams. So you really do get an increased amount. So I think, for someone who's really aggressively trying to cut calories and cut weight, but they want to maintain their daily protein, essential amino acid intake, it could make sense to take 3 servings at once, a few times per day. If you're, you know, recovering from something or not able to exercise, but you're really trying to get that muscle protein synthesis, it could make sense to be taking that much. Or if you're older, like my parents who are in like their 70s, I recommend, take 3 servings 2 times a day outside the context of meals. And it's the thing that could significantly impact their ability to maintain muscle, maintain activity levels, have good blood sugar regulation, like stay, not get injured, not fall and get hurt. Like it makes sense at that age maybe to be taking, those size doses.
Mm-hmm. This is huge. Like I'm feeling like I'll be like gifting this stuff to my parents and my in-laws now. And I have to say, I wouldn't say this if it wasn't true. Like this is one of the few examples in recent years. I've been in this industry for a really long time. And maybe again, as I get older, I get like more jaded or just have like less time and patience to like experiment or be a biohacker or like do anything that isn't going to be worth my time and money. And this is the first time in a long time with this product specifically that I have really like had my mind changed. And the fact that there's so much research to back it up, um, and the fact that it can have such real world, tangible, positive benefits for people, not just people who are trying to get as jacked as possible and work out as frequently as possible and recover fast and all of those things. Like this is a really, really valuable tool. And I think a lot of people, for better or worse, the people who are listening to this podcast, fat loss is a big goal for a lot of people. And having tools like this that can really be a game changer. Like I wasn't even thinking about that originally when I was thinking about this call. I was more thinking about like, explain to me what essential amino acids are and why I keep drinking this all day, every day. But this could be really life changing for people. And I know it's really beneficial even for me as somebody who, again, I've been going through a period of less physical activity, which makes me sad. And that's a story for another time. But knowing that I can do this thing that can support my muscle maintenance, can support my health, and it's so easy and so accessible is really a big deal. And it's interesting now that I've kind of been won over that I feel like people aren't talking about this enough almost. Like creatine's out there. Everyone's talking about creatine. Everybody talks about collagen, whey protein. Obviously, that's the OG. Big fan, but people aren't really talking about it that much. So it's really, I mean, you guys are kind of riding a wave here that could really change a lot of people's lives that they don't know about it yet. It's a pretty big deal. That's all I
I
have to
re-
say.
I love hearing that. I love hearing that. Well, just being in the presence of someone who's like open, right? Who like
Sure.
thinks they know, because I think I know things too.
Mm-hmm.
And all the time, like I get exposed to some type of new information. I'm like, oh, it's maybe a little different than I thought. Again, this is one of those cases. I don't mean to emphasize it too much, but it is really helpful that something like the ISSN came out with this
Yeah.
big position paper, because there are
Yeah.
like hundreds of studies on this, and we can be out there as a brand, like trying to talk about it and speak
Mm-hmm.
to it, but everyone's gonna be like, this person has bias or this brand has bias for that reason, just like you would say about a collagen brand or a
Sure.
whey protein company or whatever. But it's legit. It's
Mm-hmm.
like hundreds of studies, and it's
Mm-hmm.
studies where it's actually measuring what happens inside of real human bodies, like
Mm-hmm.
with the stable isotope tracer studies, and also real functional outcomes, people reducing calories and maintaining muscle mass,
Mm-hmm.
people literally improving functional outcomes from training, improving their endurance, improving the amount of muscular endurance that gets created, improving strength, and real studies with older people, maintaining muscle mass. Like, I mean, it's kind of sweet or cute, but like with older groups, it's like people that went from like not being able to walk to like walk for several minutes at a time. People that used to not even be able to like get up to being able to get up and move. So it's very distinct functional outcomes that actually improve people's lives. So yeah, I hope, I hope like it's a good real product, that can really help people.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's a great place to end. I mean, this has been, I feel like this is like gone by so quickly because I'm just sitting here learning, which I really appreciate. But that is one thing that I really like to talk about on the podcast is I'm here. I do this because I like to learn. I really don't have a whole lot of ego about it. I would much prefer to learn and get better than to be so stuck in my own ways that I never get anywhere. It doesn't make any sense, right? Like, we're here, let's learn and get better. But I also don't want to be somebody who is pushing things that we should all just do it to jump on the latest bandwagon. I hate that. I like, don't jump on bandwagons on purpose because other people do it. So
Yeah.
I want people to be like thoughtful and do their research and do whatever. And if it works for you, you should do it. And that goes for supplements too. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like, you have to spend a bunch of money and be this weird person who supplements everything. Or I'm this purist who never supplements ever because I just live a healthy life. Sometimes that's not enough. And sometimes it's good to be able to have backups and resources and things that can help you. So, thank you so much for coming on, and you really just gave like an amazing deep dive that I think a lot of my fellow muscle nerds are going to really appreciate this episode. So thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for the work that you're doing with Kion. Like I said, I really have been a big fan, and I've used the products for a really long time. And now I'm using more because I'm sold on the aminos. So yeah, we really, really appreciate you coming on and doing all the hard work that you're doing. It's awesome.
Well, thank you, Ashleigh, for the support and for just the platform and doing what you're doing too.
Yeah. And maybe you come on again and talk about some other crazy things, because there's
We got to
plenty
do
more we could
creatine
dive
sometime.
into.
Creatine is a cool one too.
Absolutely
Cool.
would love to do a part two. That's probably, again, the most kind of talked about supplement in our world, period. And it's also another one that I keep saying, because we're muscle science for women over here, that a lot of women still kind of think like, is that for me? Like, I'm not trying to be a big Hulk in the gym. Should I take creatine? So there's tons.
That's a short answer as it is. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, well, I'd love to have you on to do a deep dive on that too. That would be great.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ashleigh. This was great.